When I was a boy in my hometown and it had been raining for 3 days, it became so that it was no longer possible to have any consciousness of a time when it wasn't raining. Rain soaked through the walls and slime grew on the inside, in the corners, and even on the ceiling. Phones stopped working. No newspapers came. Birds disappeared from the wet branches of trees. No question of going to school. There was no language outside of, "It is raining outside." Water stood in the distant fields. It rushed down pipes and roared in the gutters. The roads became rivers in which people waded or swam. Brij Bihari brought his cows onto the veranda at the back of our house. Mother would switch on the fans in one room to try to dry the wet clothes. It was all in vain. The snake found in the toilet was proof that the world outside had changed and the natural order had been turned upside down. Only rain was permanent. You could do nothing but wait. I'm saying all this because that is exactly what has happened to us politically. We cannot imagine, I cannot imagine sometimes, a time outside this time. The people who are in power must also be deluded enough to believe this. They must think that their power is eternal, that they will sit on the throne forever. And it is this thought that is their failing, because it condemns them to missteps and error. Stay alert. You will hear the rain stop and the wind shift. The powerful will not be waiting for it, but that moment will come. It will mark the beginning of their doom, their end.
Thank you so much, Amitava. Hello and welcome to Newslaundry Interviews. We have with us journalist, author, and currently professor of English at Vassar College, Amitava Kumar. Welcome.
Thank you.
His latest book, from which he just read a passage out, is out. It's been out for a while. I think it released in October, right?
Gigi, yeah.
And it's called A Time Outside This Time. You can see it here. And I think the passage that you read, and why I wanted you to read it out for our audiences, because I think it captures a lot of what many Indians may feel today. There's an invincible party at the center. It's changing many things fundamentally in India, whether it's the media landscape or the relationship with judiciary or with institutions. And it really seems like there's going to be no time outside this time. So what is it about the current times that got you to write this book?
Manisha, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm just a great admirer of your show, because indeed the power and the situation seems invincible. But isn't it wonderful when everyone seems to be kowtowing to power, for there to be shows like this, which, with the satire, with parody, with humor, with wit, with unceasing honesty, show the other side, or point out the stupidity of anchors, for example, accepting food being spoon-fed by Swami Ramdev. So it's great. Thank you for having me. What is it about the time? Boss, it started really with, because I live and teach in the United States, I had a sense of Trump, but more than Trump being elected, about maybe a month, 2-3 months before Trump's election, was the first anniversary of Muhammad Akhlaq's killing in Dadri. And I thought I would write a little bit just to remember something or offer a little testimony of where is our humanity, that sort of thing. So that's how it started, thinking, if a man is dying, if a man is being killed, what can I write to in any way? I don't want to sound grandiloquent or ambitious to say, to put a stop to the killing, but just to offer a testimony to that life. Does that make sense to you, Boss?
Yeah.
Also, there was another video, if I might just add, there was another video of another lynching. And in that, it was in UP, and there was a man called Samiuddin, if I remember right. He's asking for water. And no one gives him water. There, you see on this video, one shot from that killing that became famous was when the police are dragging this man's body. did ask the question which my narrator also asked, what can you write that will make anyone reading you give a dying man a drink of water? कोई मर रहा है, वो पानी मांग रहा है और आप पानी भी नहीं दे रहे, वो that थोड़ा ज्यादा अगर ह्यूमनिस्ट अगर आपको नहीं साउंड करे तो वो ये सारे सवाल मुझे घेर रहे थे.
लेकिन फिर फिक्शन क्यों? Why? I mean, one thing that immediately comes to my mind is you are a journalist, you write for newspapers, news magazines. तो अगर हम fake news की बात करें या हम current times की भी बात करें या कैसे populist leaders across the world propaganda use कर रहे हैं, तो fiction से क्यों नहीं explore आपने सोचा ये करने का? और sorry, non-fiction से क्यों नहीं सोचा explore करने का, fiction से क्यों?
हाँ, that's a very good question. I basically thought that to counter one kind of truth with another kind of truth, वो जैसे, I thought people like you are doing that work anyway. Or others are. I just thought how the novel used to traditionally, at least a century ago, actually perform the task of bringing the news to people. People would learn from it. I'm just saying, why was War and Peace written? War and Peace was written in some ways to examine the war, the Napoleonic Wars. I just wanted to ask myself, it's such a challenge for myself, कि भाई, abhi in this time, what is the role that fiction can provide? Another thing that went with that was that everything that really happens, what you and I call non-fiction, what happens out in the real world always strikes me as unbelievable. I mean, so many things that happen have a fictional quality to it. You're constantly surprised by the kind of either inane things that people do or humane things that people do. All, it has never, at least in my case, never stopped to startle me. बड़ी कुछ surprise होती है कि नहीं? I mean, would you admit that?
Yeah.
To capture just for a moment the flavor of your show, Nuisance, for example, if we see Baba Ramdev picking up Arnab Goswami in his embrace, it might be expected once it has happened, but nevertheless, I am always, my timid soul is always surprised by such things. It exceeds the expectations. So मुझे हमेशा लगता है कि to think about how reality constantly outdoes our imagination. वैसा कुछ मैं सोच रहा था, as an aesthetic challenge really also.
Very interesting, because ये एक theme आपके book में भी आता है, where your protagonist does dwell on this कि इतने alternative facts हैं, तो इसमें what does fiction really mean?
Say.
What you're trying to say is that you didn't want to do the non-fiction route because you wanted fiction as an opposing force to alternate facts, or as an opposing force to reality that you're dealing with.
Against the fiction of fake news, the fiction of my novel.
So what is the role of fiction? Now you said that books were at one point supposed to be acquainting you with news in some ways, or not, if not news, acquainting you with an era, making you stop and making you think कि क्या हो रहा है. तो आज के दौर में fiction, जब लोगों के पास ना time नहीं है books पढ़ने का, when you're constantly being deluged by smartphones, by your WhatsApp messages, by even YouTube, what is the role of the writer and the fiction?
If you look at a photograph, we have a frame around a photograph. That frame makes the photograph jump out or is removed from a wall on which the photograph hangs. In other words, the frame gives the photograph or a painting and the identity of a photograph. So, in my understanding, the role of fiction is to provide that frame for news. एक हादसा हुआ, मगर उस हादसे का मायने क्या है? In a deep sense, that the fiction should deliver. Everyone knows that 9/11 happened in this country, for example. Magar, how to understand it in a way which links it both to individual psyches and to the collective understanding of this nation and to the idea of the globe, the promotion of wars elsewhere by the Americans, the return of jihad here, what had been promoted in Afghanistan by them for years. ये सारी चीजें, मेरे ख्याल से, this frame could be provided in an inventive way by fiction. And that idea of inventive or imaginative is also important for me because मुझे लगता है कि journalism doesn't necessarily put pressure on people to be inventive. it puts pressure on them to be scrupulous, or, I mean, if you're an honest journalist, but it doesn't put pressure on them to invent forms या new कोई नए तरीके
Can you
इजाद
dwell
करने
a
की.
little bit on that when you mean like put pressure on people to be inventive with the current circumstances? What do you mean?
Again, I'll try to explain that by trying what I did in my novel. मैंने सोचा कि भाई how to tell a story of someone trying to think about what happened in his childhood. तो माने अगर हिंदू मुस्लिम राइट हुआ हो किसी बच्चे के जिंदगी में और उसके जहन में ये बात है, तो how to understand it. But then tell another story of something later in his life. What happens when he goes to meet someone, let's say, who knows in West Bengal the killing of a guerrilla leader, and what the police says, what he discovers later. And then, because it is about things happening in the world, how to play with the form of the novel and have a chapter called Velocity of Lies, जिसमें सिर्फ news है, in order to give a certain understanding of what does it mean to slow jam the news, जैसे concept introduce किया मैंने. So I am playing there with the form of the novel, or the ordinary or the traditional novel would have a story moving from point A to point B to point C. जिसमें कहानी की, you're always inside the story. Here you have to step outside the story to now read 30 entries on news. I'm playing with the form of the novel and altering it a little bit and trying to say, how do I make explicit the idea that the novel, even in its origin of the meaning of the word novel, comes from news, that there is an intrinsic connection between them. And maybe by playing with form, I foreground the idea that the news is also storytelling, and storytelling is news, and there is a relationship between them. And I want my reader to be examining the news critically.
In fact, your protagonist, he jots down a lot of news headings, clippings. It's full of little pieces, little nuggets of news that it's almost like a journalist, noting down things. And so one wonders, one thing that immediately comes to your mind at the beginning is the protagonist you? Are you talking like, because it's also first person. So how much of it is you, and how much of it is...
Boss, wahan par bhi, my effort has been to actually promote in the reader this idea that it is me. Why? Because I think that, again, to contrast it from journalism, in journalism, you're not encouraged to necessarily adopt a first person voice. You can, but it is...
It's considered purpose.
Say.
Unless you're really like a, I don't know, some New Yorker long form.
In my case, I actually did want to produce writing. I have been in the last few books trying to say, hey, this is indeed my story. But it is a sleight of hand, because that is an illusion I'm promoting, because I want almost the reader to think that this is indeed a personal report, but for them to be skeptical also, so that they are skeptical of what is being offered. So it is me, but only... वो एक बड़ा अच्छा सा एक quote है of Jeff Dyer, this British writer, who says, I write everything within an inch of life, but all the art is in that inch. तो वो मुझे बड़ा अच्छा लगा कि भाई, how to promote this idea that it is a report from my life, and yet there should be, the whole narrative should be a flood with invention. मगर ये सही है कि I also, ये एक notebook देख रही है ना, ऐसे इतने छोटे छोटे नोटबुक मैं हमेशा साथ में रखता हूँ, and I do make clippings because people forget, boss. We forget what happened last Tuesday.
So is this something you do as a process? Like, do you jot down news events that you... Is it order for you as a writer?
In fact, in my files, there are also some things from Newslaundry where there's an examination of things, because when...
I'd like to know which reports have made it into your black.
I'll have to send it. For example, see how I told you about that incident which you mocked, when this female anchor climbs up on an elephant with Baba Ramdev, right? So ऐसे उसको याद रखें ताकि उसको, I can also make it a part of the story I'm telling. You know what I'm saying?
But so, when you were talking about the novel, you were saying that it was in its essence something that was supposed to be acquainting people with the times that they live in, get them to process news in a slower fashion. But for a lot of people, fiction is probably also, and especially in India, there are two aspects to it. One is people want to escape. You don't want to read people are fed up of news. They don't want to look at television news. They don't want to look at newspapers because either it's depressing or they've had too much or they have too many of their own problems to deal with. So then, where does that leave a book like yours, or even this philosophy of a novel being a political act in that sense? Second part is that today writing about things so close to life can put you in an awkward spot, in the sense that you could have, I mean, well, no one wants to ban your book, that's good, but you can offend people, or you can get I think maybe for filmmakers that's more of a concern and less for novelists, because it वो गुस्सा होने से पहले पूरा बुक पढ़ना पड़ेगा, और जो लोग गुस्सा होते हैं नहीं पढ़ते।
यद्यपि वो हमेशा रिक्वायरमेंट नहीं है, लोग बिना पढ़े भी बहुत गालियां देते हैं वैसे। हाँ, but those are very good points. It is true that, I mean, ये escape वाली बात पे, not that I'm saying I'm Shyam Benegal or Satyajit Ray, but would you say to them कि बॉस हमें तो शोले देखना है, आप पाथेर पंचाली क्यों बना रहे हैं? आप will you say that? नहीं, because you and I know that watching Pathir Panchali has given us a precious gift about how to look at life and how to experience life's pains and joys. तो मुझे लगता है कि I cannot surrender the ground to Chetan Bhagats of the world. There has to be a place where I have to continue to challenge not only my reader but myself to ask more complicated questions about how to imagine a time outside this time, for example. मैंने एक बार वृंदा ग्रोवर को शाहीन बाग में सुना, again on a video that I was watching, कि भाई आप लोग स्टेट आपके साथ क्या करती है, आपको एक अपना रिकॉर्ड रखना पड़ेगा, नोट इट डाउन, क्या जुल्म हुए आपके साथ, किसी ने क्या कहा, आपके सामने क्या हुआ, note it down. तो मुझे लगा कि हाँ, let's adopt that as a motto. Let me note down everything that is happening. So I understand that everyone might not need that as their escape, but everyone might need it. एक बार, if they are put behind bars, they will want a record or a document. और मुझे लगता है कि the existential question I'm posing for us is that we are indeed behind bars. How do we remember this? All of us were moved probably when we read about the Pinjara Tod activist whose father passed away while she was in Tihar, right? So how to remember her experience and how to remember as a fellow citizen what happened to her, what happened to her father. मुझे लगता है कि भैया उससे escape क्यों नहीं, मैं तो I want to be closer to that emotion and to remember it. That's my honest answer to your first part. Second part आपका जो question था वो ये कि भाई
perils of writing something so close to what's happening around you at a time when people get offended with you touching on anything, and especially there's also this thing कि आप book लिख रहे हो तो book लिखो, why do you have to interfere with what's happening? आप comedy कर रहे हो तो comedy करो, आपको क्यों बोलना है कि देश में क्या हो रहा है? That kind of
I don't know whether you have read an earlier book of mine जो भारत में it was published as The Lovers. तो वो किताब जो है वो इंडिया में जब छपी तो publishers ने कभी कुछ मुझसे नहीं कहा, लेकिन यहाँ पे the publishers required me to meet a lawyer who wanted to know if the letters I had quoted from a couple of women whether they were real वगैरह. ठीक है, अब इस बार अमेरिकन को कोई दिक्कत नहीं थी इस किताब से, ये जो आप किताब जिस पर हम चर्चा कर रहे हैं, मगर भारतीय लोग, even the news items I have quoted in the Velocity of News wanted links to every news item. So there was some anxiety there. Lawyers ने वो सारी चीजें को देखा कि भाई हाँ, everything had to be, how shall I say, referenced and vetted. So उससे मुझे थोड़ी सी घबराहट हुई कि मगर अभी तक लगता है किसी ने पढ़ा ही नहीं, बस आप ही हैं और दो चार और लोग होंगे शायद.
No, let's hope people are reading it and taking it at the right spirit. Speaking of real, unreal, your protagonist is married to a psychologist in the book, and there are these interesting experiments that he talks about. One is the kid whether a kid lies or not, how do you teach them a lesson? And there's another one which talks about, Walmart playing Celine Dion because it saddens you.
Sahi.
And so if you're sad, you tend to consume more. Is that a real thing? Or is
India mein bhi, you're growing up, your father, your mother, or someone will say to you, if you keep crying wolf, agar tum jhoot bologe, if you lie, then people will know that you're lying, they will not trust you, and one day when it really happens, when the wolf does come, you will say, wolf, wolf, bachao, bachao. No one will come because they'll think you're again lying.
Yeah.
Okay? So you and I, certainly I would imagine that a story like that, when told to children, would make them learn not to tell lies. Well, one study has shown, a study has shown that another story that is also very popular, or in fact, even though it is about Americans, मैंने India में while growing up I had heard, was that कि भाई George Washington ने एक cherry tree काट दी. George Washington as a child used an axe to cut the cherry tree that his father had planted. But the story as it is told here says that his father forgave the child, saying, I'm glad you told me this. This has made me believe in you, and it is okay, I love you, etc. And study has shown that that story, जिसमें ये डर नहीं है कि भाई झूठ का consequences क्या होंगे वगैरह वगैरह, makes more children tell you the truth in the studies when you ask them other questions, because they want to please their parent rather than suffer. It is not the idea of punishment, in other words, that guides behavior. It is the idea of love. Now let's come down to the other story.
That's a real experiment that you put out there. Are you interested in psychology and all? Like how is this interest married into your book?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, unlike my narrator, I'm not married to a behavioral psychologist. My wife is a leftist economist. But in my case, it became interesting to me many years ago when I came to teach at this institution called Vassar. मैंने पढ़ा कि there was an experiment done at a university. Experiment क्या था? You know, there is a faculty room sometimes where there is a coffee machine. And this was in Edinburgh, I think. And the coffee machine had a little box next to it where you were supposed to put money on an honor system. Someone had the idea, a psychologist, obviously, and they put above this box a pair of eyes. The contribution immediately went up. And then this person replaced the pair of eyes with a field of yellow flowers, and the contribution went down, but still it remained above what used to be without the image. So ye jab maine padha, I cut it out again from the New York Times magazine, and I asked a psychologist at my institution, boss, let's co-teach a course. मैं मान लीजिए एक कहानी पढ़ाऊंगा of Anton Chekhov, and your task will be to teach our students how this is actually a psychology experiment. And I'll say to him that you will teach a psychology experiment and I will show how it is an example of storytelling, because you have set a narrative into motion, you have produced an effect, and you have examined something. Okay? So there were cuts at that time. Our dean shot down the idea. Lekin मैं psychology experiments collect करता रहा.
Okay, so that's how they made it into your books.
I read a report from MIT that said कि भैया on social media bots spread the news, but they spread fake news at the same rate as what is factual news. Human beings, on the other hand, spread fake news 6 times faster than they spread facts. तो ये भी मुझे experiment बड़ी interesting लगी.
And I think it makes me also think कि fake news जो create करते हैं उनसे कुछ तो सीखना पड़ेगा कि what is it that they appeal to you.
बस.
You know, that everyone wants to believe it, and what is about it that, and I think, you know, this is something that it is a long cherished project that I would someday like to do. Is I think not in a bad way, but in some ways journalists probably need to understand this art of telling truth that interestingly or convincingly, or playing to you in a way that appeals to you, for truth to spread as fast as fake news, because sometimes, you know, even I, when I'm looking at fake news, I'm like, wow, like, ये किसने लिखा है, and it's so.
किसने लिखा है?
And even in your book, actually, you cite some, you know, fake news which your protagonist really likes, and he says, I've recorded it because I really like it.
Say.
The Trump gorilla one.
Trump. This story about Trump in the early days of the presidency, asking for the gorilla channel, and being awake in the morning, wearing his bathrobe, a few inches away from the TV screen, watching. मुझे तो लगा कि भाई सही है. It spread. And it was spread so virally. And I thought, it is fake news. But what is it about it that appeals so much and it is spread so far? Yeah. So I asked the people at MIT, and they said, this happens because fake news is novel. तो मुझे तो लगा कि भाई ये तो मेरा क्षेत्र.
Novel in the sense that it's new?
It is new, yes. That's what they meant.
But that's not really true, right? Is it?
Exactly. That's what my narrator also thinks. That's not true.
Yeah, because some of it is really things that you believe in.
Yes.
Kind of, you know, they're being validated by.
Exactly. Your biases are being confirmed. In fact, often much of the fake news that you see, or at least what my relatives send from India on WhatsApp, is the most, I won't even say bland, but sthul sa, blunt sa fiction hota hai. You know, it is most stereotypical, it is predictable, it is banal. And that is not the feeling you get when you read Munshi Premchand. That is fiction in the sense that there is, you know, जानवर खेत चल रहे हैं, लेकिन the farmer doesn't leave his bed. उसको लग रहा है कि है पूस की रात, बढ़िया कहानी ना, you know, or all sorts of things. This is fiction, has surprise in it. Most of the fake news we get is only a confirmation of your bias.
Yeah, I think that's something really worth investigating. I think we should put in more, someone at MIT should put in more resources to really figuring out what, because sometimes it's clever also. Sometimes I'd say it's not even banal. I mean, at newslaundry, because we come across, and there's fake news, which is out and out galat. And then there's propaganda, which is just a very smarter way of making you think a certain way. But obviously it's, you know, it's twisting a lot of facts for you. So last two quick questions from you. One is, because we're talking about fake news now, we get this from a lot of our audiences. And I think as journalists also, a lot of us feel fatigued. कि हम कितना भी लिखें, हम कितना भी करें, like you said, सच तो पहुंचने वाला नहीं है ज़्यादा लोगों तक, ज़्यादातर लोग फेक न्यूज़ ही सुनेंगे. और न्यूज़ कंज्यूमर्स में भी जो डिसर्निंग है, उनको लगता है कि हम कैसे अपने पेरेंट्स को बताएं कि ये ना देखें या ये गलत है, या you know, how do we get them to read correct news? So how do you see this fatigue among journalists? I mean, what is it that we can do to not get fatigued by this deluge of alternate, you know, facts that we are given every day? And for news consumers, how do you think they can fight fake news from a creative novelist perspective?
Yes. My narrator cites the example of Jon Stewart's show, where Trump's tweets were curated into a museum offering. His tweets were surrounded by golden gilt, जिस तरह उसके hotels में होती हैं, वैसे frames, and there was art critical commentaries on it. और मुझे उस example से कम what I learned from it was that what humor does, and what I think you do on your nuisance show, is reframe it in a way that is actually entertaining too. The excitement of parody and satire is that it shows what we are tired of in a new light, and we can also enjoy it. Hai ki nahi? I mean, I have an answer for what creative journalists or writers can do. What ordinary people can do, it will always sound like a moral science class, yeah, civics class, ki bhai, become more critical, do not do this, do not do that. Like usme bhi, I just, because you've asked the question and I want to be a good citizen and a good participant on your show, I want to say, you have to put your phone away for a long time, often. You have to read longer bits of news. आप फोन पे व्हाट्सएप के बजाय आप एक अखबार पढ़िए. अखबारों, you know, subscribe to newspapers, keep newspapers and magazines alive, engage. आपने अभी एक phrase use किया, long form journalism. भाई read long form journalism. And most important, read my novel. अगर आप मेरी किताब पढ़ेंगे तो you will know a lot about how to understand, how to read news, how to understand it, and how to reframe it.
Yeah, we've talked about fake news and all, and I think there's one slightly philosophical question that we always think of, when we talk of fake news, and this is something that uh, last Media Rumble, which is like a little conclave of journalists that we do in Delhi, we were discussing fake news, and then one of the panelists said, "But what is truth? Like you have this whole thing of fake news, and what you believe in is wrong, what I believe in is right, but isn't aren't we living in a reality? And why does fake news or alternate facts work is because we all live in our own truths, and that is perhaps how it's always been. It's just that with social media we've got to know, or it can be weaponized, or it can be made into a tool. But is fake news new? It's been around, and what is so great about the truth?
What social media really promotes is because of the way algorithms work. You only see what you want to see, or you're given what your predilections have revealed. The algorithms serve to you, and therefore it promotes your existence in a bubble of your own making. And therefore you're surrounded by people who believe like you. And this has led to a great polarization in our society. So this is indeed new. It has not always been so. Truth has always been, भाई अश्वत्थामा मर गया है नहीं मरा, ये तो बहुत पुराना प्रश्न रहा है. The idea of truth being a contested field has been true before and is true now. So there's nothing new about that fight. But what is new is that we live in more and more of a bubble that is a truth of our own rather than a truth in contestation. So our role has to always be how to open to contestation this field, not in order to assert a single truth, but to address the fact that there are pluralities here. I think democracy ki future usi mein hai, where we always say that your truth is not the only truth.
And I think that's really wonderfully put. Now, before you go, because you talk about the novel being, it's almost like a political act where it is also talking about the current times, putting a frame around, what's happening around you. So, do you have any suggestions for our viewers on some modern day writers, or well, not modern day, or writers who you think that they should read, who are doing that well today?
Ji. For me, a little bit of the inspiration for this novel came. एक महिला है ओलिविया लैंग, LAING, UK की writer है. She is writing about her wedding or her narrator's wedding in London. और कोई फोन अपना निकालता है और कहता है, oh, Steve Bannon has resigned. तो मुझे, I like that kind of writing that carries a certain mark of the present. Like I was telling someone in an interview, like blood on the bandage. You sense a wound under, and it's all fresh. So, even as a writer, when I came out from Patna and came to Delhi, to read people like Kushwant Singh or Dom Moraes or Ved Mehta, who were describing our own streets, was a revelation to me, because मुझे लगा कि हर किताब में एक कोई Thomas होना चाहिए, कोई Jane होनी चाहिए, and the road should be called Chiswick Street. मगर now suddenly there was, Purana Kila, Barakhamba Road. So that was a great thing for me. So in that same way, I think the sign not only of the space that is familiar, but a time that is familiar is very revivifying. So Hanif Qureshi or Salman Rushdie in the 90s, और अब when you come, मुझे तो अरुंधति रॉय की कहानियां भी ठीक लगी उस तरह से. किरण देसाई, Inheritance of Loss. I learned from Suitable Boy how to write about India in the sense कि भाई बिहार यूपी का जो कल्चर है उसको अंग्रेजी में in a simple nice way how to make
fabulous
it
book. It's just
बड़ा मजा आया, लगा जैसे कि
you felt bad जब खत्म हुई book.
हाँ, सही
मोटी बुक खत्म होने के बाद बुरा लगा.
एक to answer in your spirit of your question, Anuk Arud Pragasam, A Passage North, ये श्रीलंकन राइटर हैं, यंग राइटर हैं. How to understand, because I myself in my book are talking about slow news, how to slow it down. In his case, even an ordinary sentence carries in a very quiet way the sense of trauma that the Sri Lankan Tamils have faced over these years of war. In other words, how to make our language so sensitive that even when describing ordinary things, they capture a sense of the buried histories. That was a lesson I learned from that book. And a last recommendation, I have just finished reading a non-fiction book by Vineet Gill on Nirmal Verma. कि भैया ये हमारा पहला एक cosmopolitan. I said, when I was a school kid, I would learn about Rahul Sanskritan, कि भाई वो Tibet चले गए, Burma चले गए, कहाँ चले गए. This idea of Nirmal Verma going to Czechoslovakia, going to England, coming back to his Barsati in Defense Colony or wherever it was, in Karol Bagh, and then carrying these different worlds inside him. ये मुझे बड़ी अच्छी बात लगी, बिकॉज हर हिंदुस्तानी जो है ना वो एक महान कॉस्मोपॉलिटन है. हम लोगों की जिंदगी में एक यूरोप भी है, एक चाइना भी है, एक जापान भी है, रशिया भी है. So I thought that would be a good book for your readers, or certainly. So I want to advocate Vineet Gill's book on Nirmal Verma.
Thank you so much for taking out the time and chatting with us. You guys can get this book, read it, and meditate on it.
Manisha, I'm a great admirer of yours. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Very kind of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you guys for watching.
Bye.